Hello and welcome to In Conversation with me, Jen Stout. Dave Wheeler is our guest tonight. Fair Isle's weatherman wears many, many hats. Airstrip manager, unofficial island photographer, innovative crofter and former dairyman, as well as many years of service for the Met Office. At 79, he's showing only some sign of slowing down. He told me about an extraordinary life, starting in wartime England, going on to far-flung South Georgia, before taking a chance on an empty croft in the 1970s. And that is where we head to now. I am in Fair Isle, in Field, looking out over the sea, and I'm here with Dave Wheeler, who lives here and has lived here for quite a while.
Quite a few years I've been on this island, because we came in 1972. Nearly 50 years, yes, yeah.
We'll talk about some of the changes you've seen here and all the things you've been involved in here, but we'll go back a bit if that's okay. You were born during the war.
I was indeed, yes, 1943, January 1943, which I think my earliest memories were, I must have been about 2 years old, but having to hide under a table down in the coal cellar as the V1s flew over. They weren't actually aimed at Doncaster at that time, but they were heading off to, I believe, to Manchester and the West Riding of Yorkshire. Yeah.
And that was in Doncaster?
Doncaster, South Yorkshire, my hometown. So I'm a proud Yorkshireman. Although I'm also a proud Fair Islander as well now.
Yeah, Yorkshire and Fair Isle are not the only places you've been. You've been to some extraordinary places in your life.
I have, yes. I hadn't travelled abroad at all until I was about 19. I'd joined the Met Office and I'd been working for 3 years at RAF Finningley in South Yorkshire, or it might be North Nottinghamshire, or even in Lincolnshire. It's on the borders of the three. I applied to go. I wanted to go to the Antarctic. I always wanted to go to the Antarctic ever since I was at primary school, when we watched the original film of Scott of the Antarctic, and it just, that was my ambition. But I wrote to the wrong place. Instead of the Falkland Islands Dependencies Survey, I ended up writing to the Falkland Islands government. I was offered a job as meteorological assistant on South Georgia. I took it, but I think it was the best move ever, because it was a lot more free and easy living on South Georgia than it would have been on an Antarctic base, not quite so restricting. So I quite honestly had a brilliant time.
What was it like then to be there?
South Georgia is pretty remote. It's 800 miles east-southeast of the Falkland Islands. They were our nearest neighbours. Population on the island during the winter, there was just perhaps a few, usually Norwegians, at the two whaling stations that were operating. But at the bay, at King Edward Point, the settlement there was just a couple of dozen of us. Falkland Islands government needed an administrator on the island just to collect taxes and harbour dues and all sorts of things like that. And once you get one person, you need radio operators, you need diesel mechanics to look after the diesel engines that provided our electricity. You needed a handyman and customs officer, and the handyman was actually also the policeman, but he didn't have much work.
Was it still quite a colonial feel to the place at that point?
Absolutely, yes. I'd actually say that though I've not been to South Georgia or the Falkland Islands since when we left in the late 60s, from what I read and from what I hear, I think that the Falklands is still probably quite colonial. South Georgia not, because in 1967, Jane and we came out on leave. I was invited to stay on to do another tour of duty, but it would be with British Antarctic Surveys, i.e. they were taking over the settlement as an Antarctic base. And of course, in those late 60s, early 70s, no women on British bases. So I could go there, but Jane couldn't stay. So I said, yeah, no, Jane, I'm not I'm going, we're going and back.
Tell me about Jane. You met Jane in 1963, is that right?
It is, yes. I was in my mid-teens. I was a bit of a loner. I do a lot of cycling and the likes on my own or with a friend, school friend. But we decided that cycling was getting a little bit too scary because the roads were still wartime type, narrow. The A1 was just mostly just a main road and quite primitive. So we sold our bikes and took to the hills. But anyway, I still went off by myself quite a bit and used to frequently go to Glencoe, west coast of Scotland, hitching up there. And one spring 1963, that's when I met Jane in the youth hostel. I have to admit that as a rather short of ready cash and things like that, I was living on baked beans and other things, and I quite honestly used to say, should chat up the girls, and at the cooking stove, the common little cooking stove, admiring whatever they were saying, or saying, that smells very nice, and they'd say, would you like to join us? And of course,
shocking.
All right, so that's how I met Jane.
You met Jane. Gosh.
Yeah, but hit it off immediately. She was up from Glasgow on her Lambretta scooter. So riding pillion and around, we'd explore the west of Scotland and things. Wow. So it was good.
Fair to say you're both quite adventurous people.
Yes, I think that would be a good description. Earlier it would have been the last summer of 62. She'd gone on the Lambretta right down to south of France, where Nice, where she and her good friend were hosting young people, sort of going out on educational tours. We spent a lot of time in that year camping, climbing and around Scotland, yeah.
She saw you off at Heathrow, which then had one terminal, you were telling me, and that was you off to South Georgia. But yeah. But you kept in touch very frequently.
I'd describe Heathrow in the early 1960s as a little bit primitive. Yeah, so she saw me off from there, and it was quite an adventure for me going down to South Georgia, because the first stage was to fly to Geneva, but it wasn't as easy. You couldn't do it in one hop back then. So from Geneva, it was a flight landed at Madrid and also Lisbon, and then from Lisbon we flew to Monrovia, northwest Africa. From there the plane refueled, then it was a night flight across to Rio de Janeiro, and then on down to Montevideo. But Jane and I kept in touch regularly, each of us writing a weekly letter, or sometimes more frequently. But of course, mail into and out of South Georgia was pretty spasmodic during the short summer month, particularly with the whaling vessels going down there in the early years. You get mail probably once a month. But then from the end of March through to October, there was only one boat, which was the RMS Darwin, that used to come down from South Georgia on a midwinter trip. Writing letters, you could do it spread out, once a week and things, and you'd build up a great collection, and then you could post them. But the fact is that you got mail in on that boat, and the boat was in for about 12 hours or something like that. So you'd got to read all the letters, scan through them, and then answer them, writing rapidly, so that you could let them have, the people you were writing to, and especially Jane, up-to-date news and some comments on what they had been writing.
What was Jane doing at that point? She was in Glasgow.
When we met, she was the PA for the French professor at Glasgow University, but did give that up to come down to South Georgia with me the second tour. Although I had to return first, and she followed a few months later because she'd got to finish working and some things on.
Yes, so tell me about how you actually proposed to Jane and got her to come to South Georgia.
I suppose it was in some ways a bit like internet dating, that you can actually build up a rapport through communications that way. Well, we'd had 7 or 8 months through the summer of '63, got to know each other quite well. But the letters, when we got them in, things developed and such, and I could see the way things were going. And yes, I'd been asking about a particular house on South Georgia that had become empty, and I was thinking to myself, I want to come back here for another tour of duty, and I've got a house. I was told that yes, you could have that house when I inquired if I got married. Could my wife come back with me? So that was the reason I proposed. But it was, I think that I'm the sort of person that does things quite spontaneously, and I thought, quickest way, telegram. So I scribbled out allowed about something like 30 words, and so I sent off a telegram via the radio station on South Georgia. Of course, the radio operator, who had to transpose the message into Morse code and then send it off, knew exactly what was happening. So I got a reply back the following day, which was pretty good. And as he entered at lunchtime, the communal dining room, we waved this small brown paper envelope to me and said, I think this is what you're expecting, Dave. Yeah. So, of course, everybody wanted to know, so that word was out immediately. So, yeah.
And she had said yes.
And yes. She said yes.
So then you got married in Glasgow. And what happened then?
We got married at the registry office in Martha Street, Glasgow, 23rd of December. So we spent our honeymoon, Christmas and New Year, at a hotel in Aviemore, because that Aviemore was just opening up then, really, as a ski centre. So we were skiing in the Cairngorms honeymoon.
Very fitting, given what you're both like. Yeah. This is into the late 60s. You and Jane went to South Georgia, and you spent some more time there, and then you came back to the UK.
Yeah, not directly back. We came out via the Falkland Islands, and at that point the RMS Darwin, which served the Falkland Islands and sailed between Port Stanley, Montevideo and then back again, it had actually been into dry dock for overhaul, a bit of a refit, a previous evening in preparation for draining out the water and giving access. The man had decided to drain out some of the water so that they could make an early start the following day. The trouble is he forgot to stop turn the tap off, drained out too much water, and the boat fell over and at an angle. And so that delayed it a month. I knew from South Georgia, a good friend down there, that his parents were managing the Goose Green sheep farm. He got an invite for us out to Goose Green for Christmas and New Year, so we spent that time there. This, of course, is in the summer down there. Most of the time we spent on horseback. I'd never ridden a horse before. On horseback, helping round up sheep. And that summer, Goose Green, they had to shear 85,000 ewes.
That's a bit different to in the car here.
Somewhat, yeah. Yes.
1968, you came back to the UK. You had been working for the Met Office, but you moved into working in TV.
Yeah, I thought I'd have a break from weather observing. Had decided really I wanted to try and make a profession out of photography, but I'd applied to various places to see if I could get a job as a professional photographer. And one of the places I was hoping to get a job was on either a military base or an air base. And the one thing that was quite interesting was training camp in Wales. But in fact, I was eventually offered a job with Stevenage and Water Pollution Research Laboratory. And went down there, but it seemed to be actually mostly photographing sewage pollution and things like that, so didn't like that.
Sewage in Stevenage, what an offer.
Yes, but more particularly I didn't like Stevenage, and Jane didn't either because she came down with me. It was a bit of a frontier town in the late 60s, so yeah, I declined that. When we got back to Glasgow, I found I'd got a letter from Scottish Television because I'd applied there as a trainee television cameraman. But that post had been filled, but I was offered a job as a sound engineer with Scottish Television in Glasgow, which was quite interesting, so I took that job.
And you moved to Tarbrax near Edinburgh for a while.
Yes, Tarbrax was a mining village, a shale mining village in the 1920s into the 1930s, but the mines had been abandoned. So we got a rather derelict terrace cottage. I was offered a transfer across to Edinburgh because Scottish Television were building a new colour studios at the top of Leith Walk. Eventually we moved through to Edinburgh. Our first accommodation was above a shop in Victoria Street, which is just above the grass market. And it was a bit of a rundown area in those days, late 60s, early 70s. But it was quite a nice small flat, but it was built into the rock of the castle. And nowadays, I mean, I've visited the place where we had the flat. It's very much upmarket now. But one of the things is that we had a dog when we were in this flat, and she absolutely became quite terrified at about 5 minutes to 1 because she knew in the next few minutes there was going to be an almighty bang when the 1 o'clock gun went off. But we moved on from there, and as I say, we got the cottage at Tarbrax, which suited us fine because it was right in the middle of nowhere, 25 miles south of Edinburgh and 1,000 feet above sea level. So the winters are lovely and snowy.
So then one day you're reading The Scotsman in your lunch break, and you read that Fair Isle has a vacancy.
Yes, I read that the National Trust for Scotland were looking for tenants for a croft on Fair Isle. So by now, wanting to move from the studio work to a more outdoor pursuit, I thought that this is quite a good opportunity. So I showed Jane the article, and she thought that, was quite a good idea. So we applied to the National Trust, were sent an application form which we duly filled in and had a good laugh on various things. And one of the questions was, what experience have you got of living on an isolated island in winter? So we just put South Georgia. 6 months without a boat. A little bit of an exaggeration, but it's more like 4 to 5 months without a boat. And another one was, what experience have you of commercial fishing? And I said, none, but would whaling do? That was tongue-in-cheek. But we were invited for an interview. I think as we lived near Edinburgh and seemed quite good applicants, we were invited for the interview and more or less next day offered the tenancy. This was just before Christmas 71. One thing we did say though was that we didn't want absolutely say yes until we'd visited the island, and so we came up to Fair Isle in late February 1972. We were stuck in Aberdeen Harbour on the St Ronald for 4 days because the seas were too rough. It was snowy as well. But we'd actually met up with Colin Martin, the marine archaeologist, so he knew, he knew some good eating places in Aberdeen, Chinese restaurants, and but he also knew how to get to Fair Isle, because when we eventually made it to Lerwick, the Good Shepherd that was Good Shepherd 2, hadn't sailed for something like 3 weeks because of persistent southeast winds. But luckily there was a Loganair charter flying into Fair Isle. The charter was to bring in mail for the lighthouses, and we were able to come in on that flight.
That's the sort of stuff that would have put some people off.
Well, I mean, for a start, the aircraft landed on the old wartime strip. This was before the runway had been slightly changed in direction and also much improved. I remember just flying in and looking ahead and seeing the approach to the airfield, and all I could see, or all we could see, were pools of water and brown grass and bare ground, and I thought, oh my goodness me. But no, it was the time here in that February-March time. We had a brilliant time. The house field had actually been sort of renovated, but it was rather primitive, but we thought, so what? People were fine. We stayed with Annie and Stuart Thompson at the post office. Of course, Neil there had just left school, so we got to know Neil, and in fact, we enjoyed it so much, and our welcome was so good that I messaged back to Scottish Television and said, we're stormbound on Fair Isle, could I have an extra few days? I'm sure we're not quite stormbound, but
yeah, so it didn't take long for you to decide this was the place you wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, you packed all your possessions up into a van and drove north.
Yes, that was pretty exciting, because we had a Mini and had sold that and bought a Morris Minor 1000 pickup with a canvas back. So while we loaded our possessions, not a huge amount, but it certainly filled a small furniture van, Jane and I, 2 dogs that we'd got, and a black lamb that we bought from the local farm, set off for Aberdeen. It began to snow, and by the time we arrived in Aberdeen, it was quite deep snow.
Now this is the story about the Rock Island Line. Now the Rock Island Line is a railroad line, and it runs down into New Orleans. And just outside of New Orleans is a big toll gate. And all the trains that go through the toll gate, why, you gotta pay the man some money. Unless, of course, they got certain things on board, then they okay, and they don't ever have to pay the man nothing. And right now, we see a train, she coming on down the line, and when she get up near to the toll gate, the depot agent shout down to the driver, he want to know what he got on board. So he say, what you got on board there, boy? And the driver, he sing right on back down to the depot agent, tell him what he got on board. Yeah, the way he sing. I got sheep, I got cows, I got horses, I got pigs, I got all livestock, I got all livestock, I got all livestock. And the man say, well, he say, you all right then, boy, you don't have to pay me nothing, just get him on through. So the train goes through the toll gate, and as it goes through, he got up a little bit of steam and a little bit of speed. And when he's safely on the other side of the toll gate, the driver shout back down the line to the man. Of course, he don't care what he say now, going home and going down the Rock Island line. So he said, but I fooled you, I got pig iron, I got pig iron, I got all pig iron. He said, tell you where I'm going, boy. Going down the Rock Island line, yes, she's a mighty good road. Oh, well, the Rock Island line, she's a mighty good road. The Rock Island line is the road to ride in. The Rock Island line is a mighty good road. And if you want to ride, you got to ride it. good loads come before to see me again. Till you coming. And the Rock Island line, it's a mighty good road. Yeah, the Rock Island line is a road to ride. The Rock Island line, it's a mighty good road. And if you want to ride, you gotta ride it like you find. You get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island line. The Rock Island line, it's a mighty good road. The Rock Island line is the road to ride. The Rock Island line, she's a mighty good road. And if you want to ride, you gotta ride it like you find. You get your ticket at the station on the Rock Island line.
That's really quite a picture of you and Jane and the two dogs and a lamb.
Yes, yeah. So the two dogs and the lamb were together in the back, but they seemed to be quite happy together, perched on top of the suitcases and other bits and pieces. Yeah.
So yes, eventually you got your things onto the Good Shepherd, and this was the Good Shepherd 2. We're now on Good Shepherd 4, and she's quite getting on a bit. So describe the Good Shepherd 2, if you would.
Well, Good Shepherd 2 was quite small. Originally, it had a wheelhouse on it which had been extended. The best description was as though you'd taken the part of the passenger compartment of a single-decker bus and stuck it on the deck behind the wheelhouse or adjoining the wheelhouse. But one of the things that was really, really excellent was that, like the old railway carriages where you had the windows would drop down, you pulled the window up and then this leather strap folded over and you pressed it onto a stud so the window couldn't go down. But if you take the strap off the stud, you can lower the window with various holes. You can have the window as low as you want. But anyway, the passenger sitting on the seat nearest the window could lower the window, be sick outside. And of course, the water washing over the deck in anything more than a smooth sea, which usually plenty of water around, would just clear it all up. So, yeah. But no, the Good Shepherd, we'd arranged that the Good Shepherd would come down to Wick. To pick us up. I said about driving to Aberdeen, but we actually went on up to Wick to meet the Good Shepherd. But unfortunately, the boat hadn't sailed because of fog. And of course, in those days, they didn't have a radar or any, other than the compass. They had very little navigation gear on board. So the boat hadn't sailed. We'd arrived at Wick with the car and the furniture van. The furniture van actually had to get back down to Edinburgh again. So we had to find somewhere to store the goods that we'd got and somewhere to stay. Luckily, we had a contact in Caithness, in Wick, worked for the Caithness Glass, and he managed to persuade the director of Caithness Glass to let us have access to his large double garage so that we could unload the furniture van and store all the stuff in this rather nice house in the suburbs of Wick. And as we were doing this, we could see window curtains twitching as people were looking out to see what was happening. So anyway, Good Shepherd arrived a couple of days later. We hired a lorry, flatbed lorry, loaded our stuff onto that and drove down to the harbour at Wick. And I can remember looking for the Good Shepherd too and not seeing it until we peered over the edge of the quay and there's the boat lying tucked in. And I thought to myself, this stuff is not going to go onto the boat. The boat, actually, Good Shepherd 2, would have fitted on the lorry. The crew managed to work miracles and got most of it on board. So it was Jane then took the pickup back down to Aberdeen because she was going to come up on the ferry. I came up on the Good Shepherd with the two dogs, the lamb, most of her bits and pieces.
How long did that take, that voyage?
I honestly can't remember, but luckily it was quite relatively smooth, and we came up through between some of the Orkney Islands and took the small thing. I suppose it was the same time, more or less, that the Good Shepherd takes to get from Fair Isle to Lerwick. Well, maybe 6 or 7 hours, 8 hours.
So then that was you and Jane moving into field, which, as you've said, was not fairly basic at the time. No running water, no electricity, and the croft hadn't really been worked for quite a while. So you had a big job on your hands.
I had a big job indeed. It was like a blank canvas, actually. that the land hadn't been worked for a generation or two, so it was quite, I was going to say quite fertile, pretty fertile, as we found out over the ensuing years, that it grew some lovely crops of oats and turnips and potatoes and the like. I don't think it was too much of a struggle. I think we enjoyed it, but they were long days. We were working quite hard. And actually, I can't say I'd got no agricultural experience. I mean, as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, I'd worked on a local farm for about 5 shillings a week, helping mostly at harvest time. I'd actually sat on the back of a reaper binder, pulling the levers and that to adjust where the cord on the sheaves was tied, and the farmer would sit on the front of the thing, controlling the 2 horses that were pulling it. So this is in the quite early years. When we had the house at Terbrax, looking south, there was a farm, adjoining farm. So Jane and I would work on the farm in our spare time during whenever there was a job to be done. And there we actually met an agricultural student. And during our early years on Fair Isle, he would come up a couple of times a year or perhaps more and give us a hand with whatever we were doing, like the fencing and the ditching. He and I, that first winter, took about 3 or 4 months. We set to and dug out the main ditch by hand, which was hard work, but at least it was rewarding work, and also began to divide up the croft into fields, paddocks, so that we could regulate, what grazings and such. Yeah, we got a couple of cows, and they had calves, and we hand milked them. By the time we'd built a number of cows up and were hand milking 3 or 4 cows, because we were selling milk on the island, 3 or 4 cows, then it was getting pretty hard work, Jane and I sort of working together. The friend said, would you like me to try and get you a milking machine, a milking unit? We said, well, yes, we can do that, please. And within a matter of weeks, he'd been to a farm sale and had bought a vacuum line milking unit with 4 buckets and such, so we could milk up to 4 cows at a time. But
I mind you guys having a lot of kye, and there was milk at the end of the track that you could pick up, and that was my main memory of that. So, yeah, and you did a lot of kind of experimentation.
We did. I'd read from books, and I used to do a lot of reading of old farm books in sort of pre-industrial age for things, and when things were done by a hand and such. And I'd come across the fact that in Australia they'd made silage, had been making silage for a long time. But one of the problems that required, sort of some degree of machinery, which we didn't have. We were basically just growing grass for hay and turnips, as well as straw oats. Since you need about an acre of grass to feed 1 cow for the winter, by the time we'd got 4 cows, then that was 4 acres of grass. Now, you could cut it with the old finger mower type machine, but it still had then to be worked by hand. You had to rake it into rows, and actually had to keep turn it and such to dry it. And of course, the island climate of Fair Isle isn't a very drying climate, and can often be damp, so it would take weeks and weeks, a lot of labour, and you had to pile it into small coals in the field, a bit like the macaroons, things, so that when the rain or when you got a good drying day, you could then throw this down and dry it a little bit staged. But we tried, actually. We had by then an old grey Fergie, and I bought an old baler from Orkney, but the grass wasn't, you couldn't dry it enough to bale immediately, so you had to continue to pile the grass up into coals and dry it, and then we used to bale it and cart it home and make it into big stacks. That was actually work, but it was still pretty hard work, and so we began to experiment with silage by cutting the grass greener, baling it, and then putting the bales into big plastic bags and sucking the air out of the plastic bags with a vacuum cleaner. It was, again, fairly laborious, but it made good silage. But the problem was that these big bales of wet grass must have weighed around about 100 weight. So it was hard work. The sucking out, it was working. So I had this brainwave of why not pile all this grass up onto a plastic sheet and with a polythene pipe from the milking unit, vacuum pump, into the grass, bury that in there, pile all the grass on it, roll it with a tractor, put the plastic sheet over the top, wrap round the edges and make it into big, huge plastic bag, and then suck out all the air. And it was miraculous because as you sucked out the air, atmospheric pressure just flattened the pile of grass and shrunk it right down. But of course, if you didn't do anything about it, it'd just expand again once you stopped sucking. So we had a very heavy herring net, which we flung over this big black sausage and weighed it down around the sides with bags filled with sand. So now it couldn't expand once you stopped sucking the air. And so that actually worked. But unfortunately, when you opened it up to cut the silage for feeding, then of course the air began to get back in again, and we found that the air was getting in, faster, and it was beginning to sort of go mouldy faster than we were using it. So after that, we moved on to had a concrete silage pit built, and I'd got bigger four-wheel drive Zetor tractor and forage harvester. Did it that way, which was, the grass was chopped into smaller pieces, rolled with the tractor, and Mary, she was then, she's now Katrina, but Mary would drive the old tractor, the small tractor, backwards and forwards to squash it, while I was off getting another trailer load of grass. By this time, we'd adopted Mary in the 70s and adopted Lucy a couple of years later. At the time we were doing this, they'd grown, Katrina would be out at high school and Lucy still at school here. But they, with Jane, when I tipped a trailer load of silage into the pit, the three of them would spread it out with hay forks and level it out, and then either Jane or Katrina would roll it flat, ready for the next load coming in.
This is my island in the sun, where my people have toiled since time begun. I may sail on many a sea, her shores will always be home to me. Oh, island in the sun, built to me by my father's hand, all my days I will sing in praise of your forest waters, your shining sun. As morning breaks the heaven on high, I lift my heavy load to the sky. Sun comes down with a burning glow, mingles my sweat with the earth below. Oh, island in the sun, built to me by my father's hand, all my days I will sing in praise of your forest waters, your shining sun. I see woman on bended knee, cutting cane for her family. I see man at the water's side, casting nets at the surging tide. Oh, island in the sun, built to me by my father's hand, all my days I will sing in praise of your forest waters, your shining sun. I hope the day will never come but I can't awake to the sound of drum. Never let me miss Carnival with calypso songs philosophical. Oh, island in the sun, built to me by my father's hand. All my days I will sing in praise of your forest waters, your shining sand.
While you're doing all of this, you're also the weatherman, netman.
Yes. Yeah. Making a living from the land was not that easy. You couldn't actually live off the land, even though you were growing some of the food for yourself, and also you've got lamb and plenty of that. And we had a barter exchange because, of course, we could sell milk, but we also made butter and cheese. We could swap butter or cheese for fish, so it was good. One of the things that I was professionally trained at was weather observing and recording. So I wrote to the Met Office and suggested that they would perhaps like to put a weather station on Fair Isle, and they thought that a good idea. It's in a nice strategic place. I started to record in 1974. I've got records dating back right till then, been working on it since then. Now it's more or less fully automatic, but in those days there was no automation whatsoever. Doing weather observations from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, every hour of the day.
How?
And then another one at 9 o'clock at night, 2100, and then one at midnight. And then I'd go to bed. Then I'd be up again at 5:30 to do the first weather observation, and of course then we were get down to the milking as well. So it was pretty full-time work.
And then there's sheep, of course, and then there's just wider island life, which you've always been very involved in, and all the changes that were happening in Fair Isle at that time.
Yes, back in the 70s, 80s, I worked as an assistant lighthouse keeper and was on the Coast Guard team, and worked at the airstrip as a fireman and airstrip manager. It's just, there's not a lot of spare time in the day, but...
Well, you say that, but you've also managed over the years to document island life with your photography. It's a huge resource of fantastic pictures and the weather and crofting life and all the guising and pantomimes, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to look through, and you somehow find time to do that as well.
Yes, but if you like doing things, you'll always find time for them, and I just like... doing things. I've always been interested in photography. I got my first camera when I was given it by my granddad when I was 8 years old. And I think in my files and in my negative albums, I've got pictures certainly from the early 50s and right the way through. The hobby, of course, developed further in South Georgia, where there was a well-equipped dark room, and so I learnt to process black and white and colour transparencies and the likes. And moving to Fair Isle, I was able to convert the bathroom to a dark room just by putting a polythene sheet up at the window. And when the house was refurbished and a second floor put on in the extension above the porch, I actually got a dedicated dark room. Right from the beginning, arriving here with a camera, I was documenting whatever was happening. I always had a camera slung round my neck. People at first were a little bit reticent about being photographed and such, but it didn't take them long to realise that I wasn't doing anything with these photographs, like selling them to the press and what have you. It was just recording, documenting what was going on. I don't do that so much nowadays, because from 2010, earlier than that, in fact, once people began to get mobile phones and the likes of that, then everybody's taking pictures. So there's not the degree of urgency that I felt, to just continue documenting things. I do still, any major thing that goes on, I do record what it is.
What was Fair Isle like then, if we're talking about sort of late 80s, early 90s?
The rate of change wasn't that huge back through the 70s and 80s. People just knew what life was like here and just got on with it. But as I mentioned, we did introduce some things, innovations in agriculture, but we were basically lucky to arrive at a time when the introduction of the first tractor, a year or so before we arrived, things began to change from then. There were other things, the fact, I think, fueled by back in the late 1970s, when there was a oil price problem and generating electricity up on the island by the small diesel generators that we had back then, about 5 or 6 separate generators supplying 3 or 4 houses. Because of my meteorological background, I realised that Fair Isle was probably one of the windiest low-level places in the British Isles, and thought that wind power would be something that we ought to look into. And I was in communications with various people and were invited, I think it was 1982, to go to a symposium in Inverness that was meeting to discuss energy requirements for communities that were off the grid. So I went there and explained what the situation was on Fair Isle. And after that meeting, I was approached by an engineer from NEI who said that they were interested in doing a research thing with a windmill on Fair Isle. So yeah, we got our first windmill in about early in the 1980s. That was followed by a second one a few years later.
And that is the whole story of that is quite extraordinary, because it was kind of the first place to really do that. It required people here to learn all about this and basically run it themselves.
Yes, yeah. If you wanted to do anything on this isle, then you have to instigate it and probably end up operating it as well. That's so very well. But when things get as developed as they are now, there are so many requirements from various people on the island Well, I'm retired quite a bit from many things now, but others, you're going from one job to another. You can swap from doing 2 or 3 jobs a day. I mean, there's people to look after the windmills, the electricity system here, to look after the new water supply and all that thing. And of course, things have changed at the airstrip, operating requirements and such. So yeah. It's busy.
Well, you say you've retired from many of your jobs, but at 79, you're still at the airstrip, working there.
Yes, thoroughly enjoying it. The airfield here, we're only air ground, so that the requirement is that for every flight arriving and departing, we've got an air ground radio operator. But I do half the shifts, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Neil Thompson does Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So that's good there. But I still manage. I'm the airfield manager, the aerodrome manager, and I was just looking back. I think I've been aerodrome manager since 1985, so that's quite a time. But it's a lot of it. It's good. I enjoy it, and I think one of the things is that partly retired, but just have to keep an active mind, and I think that keeps you young, actually.
Yeah. Well, you've also recently been a convert to electric bikes, and you're in all weathers. Yeah.
I mean, it's mostly for a time. I couldn't drive because I'd got a problem with my eye. That's been sorted. But I decided that do away with the car. I'm now at a stage where I've got someone managing the croft for me, so I don't have to have a pickup or a 4x4 for shifting stuff around. And yes, I got a grant for an electric bike, and I absolutely thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, it's lovely to be back on a bike again. It was one of my early passions, cycling, and to get back on it. But particularly, I had a knee replacement in February of this year. I'm hoping for another one at some point in the future, but that's not too much of a problem at the moment. Though I can't get around brilliantly easily on rough ground, cycling is just dead easy. And with an electric assist, yeah, I've got to be pedalling, otherwise the electric assist don't work, so you'll come to a stop. But I've got a couple of I've got panniers on it as well, so I can do my shopping. And if I load my shopping bags carefully, I can just slot them into the panniers and get on the bike and ride. No, it's good. I can highly recommend it. And I mean, most of it, yes, I can actually get up to the airstrip probably as the same time as I used to be able to drive there. And also, of course, that I only have to go to the airstrip in reasonable weather because the plane won't be flying if it's blowing a gale, cloudy and misty. Although you can get wet on occasions.
You've seen a lot of change here, a lot of change. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, you know, there's some things in Fair Isle that never change, mm-hmm. the weather and the transport limitations because of the weather. But, you know, socially, in terms of crofting, yeah, tell me about that.
During the 50 years of being on the island, there's been a lot of changes. Some of them I've talked about. But one thing that doesn't change is the weather. And you can't do much about that. It still affects our transport links exactly the same as it did 50 years ago. But 50 years ago or 30 years ago, folk were more aware of the fact that if it's windy, the boat's not going to sail. If it's misty, the plane's not going to fly. I think that in recent decades, there has become more dependence on the communications, particularly the plane. And people don't seem to realise that it might be sunny here and not windy. So why doesn't the plane fly? The trouble is perhaps it's foggy at Tingwall or Kirkwall, Sumbra. But also that the changes are that the flights have to follow legal requirements. And if the forecast is for probability of fog or low cloud, poor visibility, then it's not very easy for the pilots to say, yeah, we'll give it a go.
No more flying under the fog banks, as I remember.
No more flying under the fog banks. No. But and the limitations also is that the airstrip is where it is. To move it elsewhere or lengthen it or change it and such is not easy. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's not easy. The boat is limited in size and capacity because it's wanted to be, everybody wants, the crew wants it to be an island-based boat, which it really has to be, because if it isn't, that boat is not going to just serve Fair Isle. It's going to be used for other purposes as well. And will probably not always be able to operate on the days when the weather is suitable here. So, yeah.
Well, and also just having jobs on the island, as soon as you take away those jobs, that's a huge impact.
It would be, indeed, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, it would, without a doubt.
You've got a huge collection of letters between yourself and Jane in the early years, and of all of your sort of Christmas newsletters that you sent out, which are in themselves like a kind of social record of the island as well as your own family life. How do you feel now, sort of looking back on all this and all that you've achieved and all that you've seen?
Well, I've enjoyed this talking to you. The fact that it'll go to a broader audience. I don't know what I want to do with my photographs and the letters and such. I have this urge this feeling that I should write a book. But will I ever get round to it? Maybe when I retire.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
Guess mine is not the first heartbroken.
You've been listening to In Conversation with Dave Wheeler. My thanks to him for sharing his stories and his musical choices. You heard Sailing By, Rock Island Line, Island in the Sun, and Hopelessly Devoted to You. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
You know, I'm just a fool who's willing to sit around and wait for you. But baby, can't you see there's nothing else for me to do? I'm hopelessly devoted to you. But now there's nowhere to hide since you pushed my love aside. I'm out of my head, hopelessly devoted to you. Hopelessly devoted to you. Hopelessly devoted to you. My head is saying, fool, forget him. My heart is saying, don't let go. Hold on to the end. That's what I intend.